All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Between Two Weeds. Today's special, we've got Daniel Weiss, one of the partners in Nola Weiss LLP, doing business as Vice Legal. He's going to be talking with me today about New York's recreational cannabis licensing, what's going on there, what the newest events are happening. So welcome, Daniel. Thanks for having.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
All right. So we're going to start with, for those of you who've been living on the moon for the past 6 months, just this current state of the New York's licensing. So the recreational laws did pass, but we want to understand a little bit more about what that kind of comprises of and what it looks like. So if you want to discuss a little bit about, the agency involved that oversees the licensing, the application process, et cetera.
Absolutely. So New York finally passed their recreational bill. It's, what is it? State Bill 854. And Cuomo decided to sign that into law when his 10th accuser actually filed for sexual harassment. And he had no choice at that point. But the actual licensing bill has been on his desk for the last 3 years. And thank God, they finally signed it into law. As far as what the bill actually says is that the state is going to establish a department known as the Office of Cannabis Management, and they're right now, currently, they're putting the executives, board members in place to go ahead and lay out the entire process for applications and really licensing for the entire state. And so,
real quick with Cuomo, I did hear some of the news about his allegations. Is anything going on with that might have him removed from office that could be detrimental to this law?
I mean, he signed it into law. The only thing that could, if there was some sort of referendum where the voters of New York State, got enough people to sign a petition to pull back the actual law, that is a potential.
Okay. But it's looking pretty solid.
Highly unlikely. I mean, New York State is extremely thirsty for cannabis.
Sure.
And the medical program is not that great at satisfying the actual need for the population.
Sure.
So,
have they released any timelines on potentially when applications might be available, when people can start, getting things together, et cetera?
So, as far as the timeline, they don't really have a timeline. I mean, the timeline for actually signing this into law was 6 months, and that was 3 years ago.
Sure.
And so, I mean, if you want to try and wrap your head around that, it's probably, my best guess would be if there was a fire under their ass, 6 months.
Okay.
But if they do what New York does, it's probably going to be closer to a year.
Sure.
Maybe a year and a half even. So.
Well, potentially after what especially New York City experienced with COVID, and the city probably, and the state in general, looking for additional tax revenue. Maybe that'll help spur it maybe a little faster, and we don't have to wait the 3 years like we did last time. So.
Oh, absolutely. I think a big part of the push of getting this legislation through was generating more tax revenue.
Sure.
And that the state, their budget is far from balanced, and they're looking at the cannabis industry as sort of a vehicle to kind of make up the short in their budget.
Sure.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the medical program. Maybe that's insufficient and it just hasn't been too great. How is the recreational going to be different, or deviate from the medical program? Are they going to continue with the medical or get rid of it?
Well, the medical program, they mentioned it in the bill. They kind of revisit what the medical program entails, but what it actually is it's really 10 operators licensed by the state, and 9 of those 10 operators are publicly traded companies, and they all hate each other. And it's very vastly different from California, the California market that we're used to, which is, we grew out of a sort of collective mindset.
Sure.
And that, when I sat down with Cuomo's chief of staff, who was actually helping draft this legislation 2 years ago, they were looking at doing something very similar to the medical program, except just taxing the shit out of it. And I mean, we're spoiled being out here in California, and I was just like, that's not going to create a healthy industry, because
Sure.
I mean, they were looking at trying to do 500 licenses in the entire state, and I mentioned to them that we have 3,000 licenses in the city of LA alone, and how can you take a population that's 4 times that of the city of LA and do 1/4 the amount of licensing?
Sure.
None of it made sense. I think the latest draft that just got signed into law was so far removed from what the initial draft regs were.
Cool.
It looks a lot like California, and so
That's great.
yeah. So hopefully, it looks like they're taking steps to, and they've done their research on the recreational markets that have been sort of developing in the other states, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California,
Sure.
like what works, what doesn't. And it seems like they paid attention, because honestly, the new legislation that New York just signed into law looks very similar to California, with the exception that instead of a three-tier sort of industry, it's a 2-tier industry. And they did that mainly for tax purposes.
Okay. Well, I think that's good to know for everyone that is interested in New York, because being, kind of the home of the stock market, et cetera, I think in the medical, having 9 of the 10 being publicly traded, the big boys were going to swoop up all the licenses again.
Oh yeah, I mean that's always going to be the case.
Sure.
Right.
Well, as long as there's a little meat left over for some of the small people, I think everyone would be pleased, especially hearing that it looks like the law mimics more of California's, which those that are here on the West Coast, have an understanding of how that works. So be familiar territory.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have pretty much everything that California has, with the exception of an event organizer license. So they have all the retail licensing. They have dispensaries. They have on-site consumption lounges as an option.
Okay.
They have delivery. And then on the manufacturing level, they have processing, and then they also have what's similar to a California Type N license, which is, they call it like a cooperative distribution license. So a company can basically set up a licensed facility and have equipment that other licensed operators don't have, and they can essentially white label or allow them to process under their license.
Okay. It's like a shared use kind of thing.
Shared
then.
use,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Very, very similar to the Type N in Cali. But then they also have, they actually call it a micro business license. Exactly like California. It's essentially a craft license where you have a brewery or a winery, where
So
you
like a square footage maximum.
you
or something
cultivate,
like that.
you process, you can deliver, you can actually have a tasting room or smoking room or whatever.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, very similar to a winery or a
Cool.
brewery, and they're offering that just to kind of, I think, protect the smaller mom and pop shops
Sure.
that are just going to be, they love growing weed and they love the industry. They're not looking to necessarily go public and
Sure.
go that whole route. But
That's definitely the trend too. I mean, I think a lot of the consumers, they like that more localized kind of craft product rather than that massive, I guess, so to speak, analogy, Budweiser, mass produced stuff. So that's good to know.
well, the advantage of that license type is it's fully integrated, so you're not getting taxed at every level. And
yeah.
you're able to actually bring your product to market at a much lower price.
So let's talk about the taxes. Do you know any information about the different tax rates on the different uses?
Yeah, I mean, I can break that all down. They actually, New York did it different than California, and they decided to tax it based on THC percentage.
Oh,
So depending on
okay.
like if it's a concentrate or flower or
So
a
that's very
blunt,
similar to the alcohol industry.
very similar to
Yeah.
alcohol. So yeah, so say you have, uh, you have some honey oil and it's, people are using that concentrate. If it's coming in and testing it like a 40% THC percentage, they're paying taxes on every single amount of THC.
It's a quantity of THC.
Exactly.
So I
In
wonder if
the
they're going
product
to
that you're
create
smoking.
tiers then, because for instance, the analogy with wine, there's a reason why most wine is 13.9% ABVs, because when they hit to 14, it puts you in the next tax bracket of alcohol. So that's cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think taxes here in California have been one of the more difficult areas to really hone in on for the governments to get synergy going. As you know, the different cities have been changing their tax rates to be competitive with each other, and it's all over the place. There's not a standardized system from the top level, the state. Well, there is, but the cities can still tax on their own, and that's where the difficulty lies. So.
Yeah. And another thing, I mean, they're bringing THC and CBD both under the same umbrella. And I mean, I've always thought of, the hemp industry and the cannabis industry as, sister industries, because like some people are in, they're doing CBD ointments or CBD
Sure.
products. Some people are doing THC products, and most companies, like what they realize is they need to be in both sides of that market. But New York's taking it all under the same, and considering it as holistically.
One time. Okay.
Yeah, and so that was smart because, I mean, really, it's the same plant.
Sure.
Just different strains, different genders, and that's really the only difference between the products that are coming out of those.
Sure. Again, that's the struggle I think that the West Coast and California has been having with CBD is that cannabinoids, from hemp to the cannabis plant, they exist, same compound structure, and how do you tell the difference? And it's just, I think it's kind of creating more of a mess than it is good.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, California was one of the pioneers. It was, the first medical industry,
Sure.
and it's been established for 3 decades, and stuff is slow to change. I mean, the alcohol
Sure.
industry probably took 60 years
Yeah.
to get to where it's at now.
Standardized system, so to
Right,
speak.
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we still got another 30 years to figure everything out. But, I mean, it seems like New York's being proactive in that regard.
Sure.
I'm just interested to see how many licenses that they actually
Authorize in total.
right in
Yeah.
total, yeah, because I told them they said 500 2 years ago, and I told them it was less than 1,000. They're setting
Yeah, it's
themselves
too
up
much.
for failure, and
Is that? Do you know if it'd be like maybe let's just say 500 or 1,000 in that first round, and there's a second round, or is it just that was
I'm
total
sure-
for everything?
I mean, I'm sure they're gonna revise whatever their initial,
Sure.
similar to Illinois. Illinois came out with 75 retail out of the gate, and then immediately they doubled that number.
So speaking of Illinois and California, I guess in restricted amounts of licenses, I noticed that it looks like New York may have some social equity aspects to the new law. There's differing opinions when you have a limited amount of licenses, and it seems like social equity gets the priority. They often, such as in Illinois, end up winning every single license,
Yeah,
leaving no room for those that are not social equity.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm just gonna kind of lay out what social equity is for anybody who doesn't know what that is. Social equity essentially is it's a program which is affording a sort of reparations to communities that were disparately impacted by the war on drugs. So people who were, say, have a marijuana possession offense back in the 80s, 90s, even as early as like 2 years ago, where, it was illegal then.
Sure.
And the community was impacted now they're given priority in the licensing process.
Okay.
And that's huge. A lot of people don't even realize what it is. They don't realize what benefit that can come of that. But New York's bill, I would say 50% of the licenses that are issued are going to be
Social equity.
to social equity, tier 1, tier 2. I don't know how they're going to be ranking those applicants, but
Sure.
generally, if you have a marijuana possession offense or you're from a community that was severely impacted by the war on drugs, they break it down by number of marijuana-related arrests
Oh, so if you have
within
more
specific
arrests-
districts of
Oh.
New York. So I mean, I don't want to,
Pontificate.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're in Queens or East Harlem,
Probably more there.
you
than-
probably have a better chance of getting a license than somebody who's from East Hampton.
Sure.
So,
Well, when it comes to, so like LA, I know they did a certain amount dedicated to social equity, then a certain amount dedicated to non, which was nice. Everybody knew there'd be some left over, whereas Illinois did not do that. And it was all swallowed up by social equity, so far as we know. Yeah, so that's good to know that if they do put a cap, let's call it 50%, that there's room for those that may or not qualify as well. So I think that really levels the playing field.
yeah, it's just, it just becomes, a numbers game at that point, and your chances of getting a license just are astronomically higher if you are a social equity
Sure.
applicant. Yeah.
So we know that that's going to be a part of the process. What else is a part of the application process? I mean, is there real estate aspects that we should know about, other minority aspects,
Absolutely.
requirements?
Yeah, so they haven't laid out the application process, but I mean, judging from the way the legislation looks in the bill, it's probably going to be very similar to what we've seen before, California and in Illinois, where, I mean, obviously you have to have a real estate, a piece of real estate. Either you're leasing it or you own the property. And I mean, usually if you use like a general buffer zone sort of scenario, I mean, hopefully it's over 1,000 feet from a K through 8 school or a public library, at least 600 feet from a park, or I don't think they're going to go full. Some states have a buffer zone requirement for churches, but I mean, if that were the case, I mean, the entire city of New York would be probably X'd out
Sure.
of zoning. So I doubt that that's going to be in there. But yeah, you need real estate first and foremost. Obviously you have to have a company or an individual that you're going to be applying for the license under. So you can apply as an individual, but the thing about it is if you have a company established, an LLC or a corporation, it's going to allow that to continue, because if that individual passes away or something happens, then the license is going to be
Sure.
subject to recall. So yeah, you have to have a company, you have to have all of that corporate operating agreements, bylaws, all of that
Sure.
in place, and they're going to do a background check on you. Usually it's a live scan that's subject to FBI and DOJ. And beyond that, I mean, seller's permit, EIN,
Okay.
and they just want to know that you have everything in place to run a business and that they can tax you on it.
Sure.
That's what it comes down to. And so, I mean, running through all of that, I mean, sometimes getting a property, just that in and of itself can be a 9-month process.
Sure. Yeah.
And I mean, the business stuff, I mean, you can knock that out in a couple of weeks. But the actual application is going to require standard operating procedures, like for the actual business, which includes security plans, everything down to how your employees are clocking in, handling
Sure.
the actual material, what's happening to the hazardous waste that's produced, if there is any.
Sure.
If it's a cultivation operation, you're going to have to probably be dealing with the what's it called, the water.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Water Quality Act stuff, CEQA, et cetera.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
sure.
Making sure that, you don't have, you're not growing stuff and you're not putting pesticides that's seeping down into the soil.
Sure.
But yeah, that's just another part of the process. And because it's a top-down sort of licensing jurisdiction, top-down by what I mean is you get licensed at the state level, and then you go ahead and take that license approval to whatever locality that you're going to be.
Okay. So it's in the reverse of California then?
Yeah, California, you get your local authorization and license first, and then the state will just sign off on it
Approve
and
you as
make
long
sure
as you got
that
everything
all
in
of your
line.
shit's
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Sure.
But New York's the exact opposite. You get licensed at the state level, and then you go find a city to put your license in.
Sure.
Yeah, they may require you to do those things in tandem, but again, it's the state authority that really calls the shots. The local authority is just going to give you some sort of like letter that permits you to actually operate in that location.
Sure.
And so there's probably going to be a CUP process as part of your build out. When you get your license approved, then you build out your operation, and then that can take anywhere from 9 months to a year,
Sure.
and then you get operational. So I mean, for somebody who's looking to get licensed in the next 2 years, they need to start now.
Oh, you had mentioned some of the difficulties with obtaining real estate, and I think we know in California it's because the zoning restrictions when buffer zones, et cetera, can be so heavy. Finding that right property is difficult. What are some of the zoning, codes that people should be looking out for? Is it all industrial, or are they going to allow retail zones, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, that's really going to come down to the specific jurisdiction that you're in. So
Okay.
Albany is going to have different requirements. They can curtail the state sort of requirements. So if the state requires you to be 1,000 feet from a school, a K through 8 school, Albany can say, oh wait, we want it to be 800 feet from a K through 8 school.
Okay.
So like they can tailor that down. So it's just really going to depend on what state or county that you're going to be establishing your cannabis business in.
Sure. Okay. So I guess in summation, what's the big picture or takeaway about New York? What should people really be focusing on right now?
So like right now, it's legal to possess, cannabis if you're 21 or older. But now
I mean, what
they
do you-
haven't laid out the entire application process. But that being said,
Just
right
so much
now,
for real
like
estate or
everyone's
whatever.
waiting for that. Everyone's waiting for them to establish the Office of Cannabis Management, to have them write regulations for all of these use types.
Sure.
And that's what they're waiting for in order to go ahead and start the process of like finding a property and start talking to
Sure.
the local jurisdictions that they're trying to get licensed in.
So maybe
That's,
I think that the advice maybe is just to kind of pay attention to the developing, aspects of the law from the OCM being created, et cetera. That's really what people should be just watching the news, so to speak, or trying to be.
I mean, I think they should start apps like right now. Like if
Yeah.
they're not looking at properties and they're not trying to figure out what cities are going to be okay
Sure.
with cannabis, because some cities can opt out, but they're not going to be able to take any of that tax revenue. If you're in generally a city that has a fairly diverse urban population, I mean, even like White Plains, Albany, Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, I mean, that they're going to be licensing for cannabis.
Okay.
And so you need to start the ball rolling now because it's only going to save you money. Because once they release those departmental regulations, everybody's just going to be, okay, now we have our plan that the state is saying this is what we're doing, but now you're staring at the competition right across the table, and now you're going to be paying double, triple the rent,
Sure.
or
Way too long.
or even like purchasing. If you're trying to buy a property that's compliant in Albany, it might be $1 million today. It'll be $2 million in 3 months.
So you were talking about the opt-in, opt-out thing with the local jurisdictions. Is that going to be a part of the development with OCM, or when would we know what cities are in and what cities are out?
Some of them have already opted out.
Oh, they have. Okay.
Yeah.
So that some of that information exists already. Cool.
Yeah. So I mean, just looking up your city or your county, if it's unincorporated, and finding out what the stance is on cannabis. And if it looks like most of them are looking for that tax revenue, then
Sure.
you can basically bet that you can start looking for property now.
So over the next 6 months, you'd say that's probably what people should be focused on is the real estate, which local jurisdictions might be
Yeah.
opting in and be ideal for whatever, their needs are.
Yeah, I mean, real estate matters if you have a retail use or you're a distributor and you want to hub in a certain area.
Sure.
If you're a cultivator or you're a manufacturer, it really doesn't matter where
Sure,
you're
yeah.
producing. You can be in the middle of nowhere,
Sure.
and you can,
Because your market's basically the whole state, right?
yeah, you
Yeah.
can have that shot out to the whole state in 4 hours.
Sure.
It's not a huge state, but it's a very populous state, and so that's the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. We appreciate you having on Between Two Weeds today. So everybody in New York, keep an eye out. Looks like it's 6 months, 12 months, sometime soon. So we'll know more shortly. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.